I'm Amy, Head of Learning and Development and Support at Trade.
So welcome to those to another Credit Thursday. And today we're going to be talking about something that I know makes a lot of credit controllers and finance managers go a little bit glassy-eyed. And we're going to be talking about the law. Dun, dun, dun. With regards to that, just a disclaimer, I am not a qualified lawyer, but we're going to be talking about the concepts and how they affect us in the credit environment. And these are certain policies that we have to abide by. So those are things like Popia, the CPA, the NCA, and the NCR as well. So those are the topics we're going to be going through. Oh, and of course, Fica, don't forget Fica, which is also something that affects us as well. So 5 sets of letters that get thrown around all the time. And if I'm honest, most of us not along and in meetings, we're hoping that nobody asks us anything about explaining the difference between all these things. So hopefully before the end of today, we will be able to have a little bit more clarity and be able to add some value for you. Okay, so here's my promise for the next 45 minutes or so. So no reading legislation to you. I'm not going to be doing that. And by the end, you should know what each one is, why it exists, and most importantly, what you specifically need to be doing differently in order to make sure that you're compliant. Okay, so here's a roadmap for today. As you should know, if you've been here before, we like to start with why does this matter? Because if you don't see how this lands on your desk, then the rest of it will not make sense to say, like, why is this applicable to me? And so I'm just going to move my computer a little bit higher. I feel like the view is all the way up my nose. Okay, so let's just go back to that. The next thing that we're going to be then working through is the National Credit Act. So what is that? We're going to then be moving into the NCR, which governs how credit is granted in South Africa. And then the body that enforces it, which is the National Credit Regulator, the NCR, which is what they refer to as. And then we're going to be moving into the next 2 options, which is the CPA, which is the Consumer Protection Act, as well as, making sure that we cover the Popia and the Fica as well. So let's dive right into it. Right, so let me make this real before we go anywhere near the details. So I want you to think about a normal Thursday in your office, and which is, I suppose, today. And a new customer wants to open a 30-day account with you. What do? So you ask them for their company registration documents, you ask them for their ID, the ID copies of the directors, you ask for banking details, you ask for financial information, and I'm hoping you're asking for all these things, and maybe a bit of personal surety that you ask for, and that personal surety may come with a spouse's information as well. So right there, before you've even made a decision to say, yes, I'm actually going to onboard this customer, you're already collecting personal information, okay? And so at this moment, you need to comply with Popia because Popia is now in the room with you. So how do you store it? Who do you share it with, or how do you share it with them? And how long are you allowed to keep it for? So all of this is governed by the Popia Act. Then you need to assess them. So you decide, okay, do we want to give this customer credit, yes or no, and how much? That decision of granting credit is the heart of the National Credit Act. And the NCA cares a great deal, I should hope, about whether or not credit is being granted responsibly. So that's very important as well, to say that you have a responsibility to ensure that not only are we saying yes, but we're being responsible when we do say yes. And it's okay to say no if we actually don't feel that we are going to be lending responsibly and not recklessly. Then you send them your terms and conditions and your surety documentation for them to sign. And these documents have to be fair, and they have to have, be in a language that is of normal human beings, and they need to be able to understand what it is that's being written. That's the Consumer Protection Act, where they come and say, this needs to be explicit to know that somebody is signing surety and it's not something that is signed, and sandwiched between your old T's and C's, which is something that everybody used to do. They used to put it as a clause. And so the Consumer Protection Act came in. And if a customer, doesn't see it, they can later come back and say, oh, I didn't understand that, or it was buried in the fine print. And then you may have a problem, and you're going to have to fight your cause. I have heard from customers of ours to say that they have had a case like this before. They did actually win that particular case, but you don't want to put yourself in a predicament. And therefore, we want to make sure that we are as explicit and open as possible. So underneath all of that, somebody is watching, and that somebody is the NCR, and they are the credit industry. The information the regulator is watching, they watch how you handle the data. So they're not toothless. They're not going to come and investigate every issue and do all these sorts of things. But once they do investigate, if they feel that something is happening, then they can issue you with a fine. And this is the part that hurts, because they name you publicly on public websites, and this isn't a tick boxing that you want to be in part of. It's your reputation that's actually on the bottom line, and that's what we're going to be spending our time on today, to say what would happen if we didn't comply and if we got investigated. Okay, so we don't want to be that guy. So the 5 names, one job, and that's protecting the trust. So before we go deep into each one of them, let's look at a quick 30-second version of all 5 of them. So you've got the shape of it in your head, I'm hoping, and think about it like a soccer match. And we speak about this at the office all the time, being a high performance soccer team and not necessarily a family. We got to all work together for the end goal. So the NCA, which is the National Credit Act, is the rule book. Okay, it's the laws of the game for granting credit. It says credit must be granted responsibly, and it protects people from being given credit that they can't afford. And that is the law. Okay, so when you think about it, can I give them more? Can I give them less? Can I increase their credit limit? It's our responsibility to ensure that we follow the NCA, which is the rule book. And this should be written into your credit policy as well. Okay, the next thing we have here is the NCR, the R being the difference, and this is the National Credit Regulator. So they are, let's refer to them as the referee. So it's not the law, it's the body. It's the people who make sure that everyone plays by the NCA's rules. So when you hear NCA, think of the rule book. When you hear NCR, think of the referee. And people seem to mix these two up quite often, and I can see why. The next thing that we're looking at over here is the CPA, which is the Consumer Protection Act. So it's all about fair play between you and your customer. It's honest dealings, it's fair terms, it's plain language, and it's obviously decent quality of goods. So there's no tricks, there's no fine print traps. That is the CPA. Yes, Martin.
I mean, one thing that we mustn't forget. This little law, this Consumer Protection Act, if you trade with a sole proprietor, that's this character.
Yes.
Because you're trading with someone in his personal capacity. So all the laws about how you trade with him and the promises you make to him and then don't deliver, they all come into play. You start talking about the Consumer Protection Act. Very dangerous. You know what? You said a very interesting thing when you said, today's Thursday, just think about a normal day. You know that every single day, all of us gather personal information. Think about it.
Absolutely.
If you are on Instagram, Facebook, any one of those pages, you are constantly interacting with someone else's personal information. And what you do with that information is extremely important, because you could expose yourself to some serious legal action if you use that information incorrectly. I'm diverting away from legal and contractual and business to business, but that same act protects every single one of us individually as a person. Personal Information Protection Act. That is what it is. protects me as a person and my information. Right. So
Absolutely.
always be
Abs-
very on your toes. I know they say they call it public platforms, but it doesn't mean it's the public Skinner page. You can't Skinner about people there. Be careful what you say.
Absolutely. So let's go back into what we were doing over here. So this is the Popia Act. So the Popia Act, which stands for Protection of Personal Informations Act. And this is about looking after personal informations properly. So treating people's data with the same care that you would want somebody to treat your own. And I do know before the Popia Act came in, one of the things that if you wanted to be mean is you would take somebody's email address and list them on all the spam websites so that they kept getting spammed. And yeah, that was just to be mean. So now you're not allowed to do that anymore. Or at least don't get caught. I'm just kidding. I'm not giving you bad advice here. Okay, so the next thing is Fica. So this is a relatively new legislation that has come into play, and this is Financial Intelligence Center Act. And it's the bouncer of the door. So let's put it that way. So they're the bouncer, they're the guy standing at the door. So before anyone gets in, you have to check who they really are. And it's the anti-money laundering law. It's the whole job of of making sure that the business knows exactly who they're dealing with, which also falls into the 5 C's of credit. Know this person, who is the customer. So notice the thread running through all of the 5. It's all about trust. So everyone that exists to protect trust in the system and trust in credit, it's the whole game. So let's open up that rule book and have a look at what it has to say. Okay, so we're going to be going to look at the National Credit Act first. And this is the big one for us in credit because it's the law that governs the things that we're actually allowed to do for a living, granting credit. That's what we are all here for. And so let's understand what it is trying to achieve and then exactly what it asks of you and of me. So let's jump into that. Okay, so the National Credit Act is it's the heart. It's it regulates how credit is granted in this country, and it's the number one obsession, that is responsible for lending. But it also wants to make sure that we're helping to grow, because at the end of the day, what is credit? Credit is giving somebody an option to say, can I buy or take your stock now so that I can sell it and make a living and make a profit? And then I'm going to buy more of your stock next week. And then I'm going to continue that way. And hopefully my business is going to grow and your business is going to grow. And all of this, us doing business, allows our economy to grow, which allows us to do more things. And so it's more than just this small, I want to let you pay later. It's not that. And so this just gives us the framework in which to make sure that we do it, to make sure that each person in this process is taken care of, especially our own businesses, and not to be selfish, but we also have to make sure that we're existing next week so that somebody else can buy from us, and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, we're here to protect our own business as well. So let's talk about who it does actually protect. And this is where you need to pay attention, because there is a line. The NCA protects the natural persons. That's the ordinary individual. And it protects smaller businesses, specifically in a jurisdiction, what's the word I'm looking for? Like the person who's in that jurisdiction. A company with an annual turnover or an asset value below R1 million. So that's what we would recall, or what we would refer to as like an SME, or an SME, like a small to medium enterprise. And so with, you have to understand that the asset value also fits into that. And so the NCA is mostly or preferably protecting those businesses. Okay, so the individuals, like Martin mentioned earlier, the consumer, as well as the smaller businesses. Okay, once a business is bigger than that, meaning that their asset value and or their annual turnover is above R1 million, then it falls outside of the NCA. So if your customer is a large corporate, the NCA largely does not apply to this relationship. So that's very important, and something that we add into a lot of credit applications, where people ask, what is your turnover value and or your asset value? Is it above or below R1 million? And that's because it falls out of the NCA's jurisdiction. Okay, But if your customer is a small business or a sole proprietor, it absolutely falls into the NCA. And here is a bit of the catches that that catches the trade credit out. So let's go through this a bit slowly. A lot of people in our world say, the NCA is for banks and for micro lenders, but not for us, because we're not lending in money. We're selling goods. And so it's not the same thing. But the truth is that if you charge interest or a fee on an overdue account, so some people say we can't charge interest using the word interest, but you can charge a penalty fee. The law calls that an incidental credit agreement. So I know a lot of our customers also get nervous. They don't call their contracts credit agreements, but rather trading facilities, or you have whatever name you have. If the business you are dealing with has an asset value or a turnover below R1 million, it is automatically a credit agreement. And the incidental credit agreement falls under the NCA. So just, to bog down the standard 30-day account that you offer with 2% interest, or anything that is paid late, and or whatever you want to call it, penalty fees, in the eyes of the law, that is a credit agreement, which means that this whole section is about you and not about the bank. So this is something that you need to check within your own business and in your credit policy, but don't assume that you are exempt. And so these are things that you may want to include in your credit application to ensure that when you are dealing with a customer, you know exactly the size of their business. Okay, so registration. So the single biggest practical thing that comes out of the NCA for a lot of businesses, and that's what this slide is that I want you to remember, is that the threshold for registering a credit as a credit provider is 0. Costs you nothing, nil. It has been this way since the 11th of November 2016. So now that does, what does this actually mean? It means that you are a credit provider. And remember, if you change interest or overdue accounts on overdue accounts, this may as well be the one that you need to ensure that you have to register with the National Credit Regulator. So that's very important. If you offer terms, okay, you need to register with them. There is no cost to you, and it doesn't matter if you're lending millions or you're lending tiny, operations. The amount no longer matters, and that's very important. How it was before 2016 is if you were, if there was a comfortable little threshold of 500,000 Rand, below that, you did not need to register. And that's the big difference that has taken place. And now I just think about it, sure, it's already been 10 years since 2016 and the changes have taken place. Okay, so lots of businesses are sheltered under that. And then the minister came along and they dropped this threshold to nil. So it was gone. And I'm sure, Martin, you can speak to how it was before. So that the old line that, we're too small to worry about registration, that excuse is dead and 10 years in the ground. Okay, so here is why you really, really don't want to get this wrong, is if you have registered or if you have not registered, then the court can declare your credit agreement unlawful. And it's a void from the start. So think about what that means in practice. You've extended credit to a customer who now owes you money, and you walk into a court to enforce a judgment, and the court says, sorry, you're not registered, and this agreement is void. Okay, so the real money you cannot recover. So this is not an admin, for admin's sake, whether you're a business that needs to register is something to confirm. So get proper advice on this, but please do not assume that you're in the clear just because you are a smaller entity. Okay. I'm going to pause there and say, does anyone have any questions? I haven't asked that yet. Sorry about that.
No questions, Amy.
No questions.
Gobsmacked by the information that you're sharing with us.
Oh, good. There we go. Ivana, let me unmute you. Did I accidentally unshare? You can still see my screen, right? Okay. Ivana, you can go ahead and speak to us.
Hi, Amy. Thank you. I've got Jane here next to me, and we are just wondering if an incidental creditor also has to register as a
Yes, they
provider
do.
because of the sole traders that we might deal with.
Absolutely. Absolutely, you do.
Okay.
And as I said, there's no cost to you. So we want to make sure that, we're aligned with absolutely everything. So yes.
And then what about the admin work after we've registered?
So I don't want to say exactly that there's no admin work, because there is going to be some from your perspective to say that you're going to need to make sure that you're keeping up with the rules. But because there's no cost involved, they may, and I can find out for you, what's required from you on a yearly basis. In other words, do you need to submit anything to them? But I can get that information for you.
Okay, please do. That will be brilliant. Thank you.
Perfect. I don't know why, for some reason, when I clicked on something, my whole screen went away. Can you still see it? You can.
Perfect.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. But I'm going to ask Neil to make a note for me, Ivana, and then we will let you know, and we'll post it on this chat, but we'll also just pop you a message afterwards. Okay. So responsible lending and affordability. So let's talk a little bit about the NCA that generally overlaps with good credit practice. So responsible lending and what the law, calls reckless credit or reckless lending. And I think we've spoken about this many a time before, but the Act expects you to assess affordability before you grant credit. Now, this is exceptionally key that you need to know, because a lot of customers say, oh, I actually don't want financials. I don't want bank statements. My customers don't want to give me bank statements or financials. What should I do? Or can we make this non-mandatory? So here we're telling you, where do we as Trade Shield come in to help you? And this is the reason why, is that the Act expects you to assess the affordability. And I know I've used this before as an example to say, we may not know each other, or at least we may not know each other well. And if I came to you and said, can I have R1,000,000 worth of your stock or your services? And no, I will not tell you whether or not I'm employed. And no, I will not give you my, my salary slips. And you go, okay, cool. Here is my stock anyway. You would think that was crazy. But that is, unfortunately, there is this stigmatism in business to say that unless you're a bank, I'm not going to share my financials with you, as opposed to I'm actually taking a loan from you, even though it's not cash, it's physical services, or it's tangible goods, or whatever the case is. There is this weird stigmatism in the industry that says I do not need to provide you with my financial information, and or it's confidential, and or they hide behind the Popia Act for this one. But the truth is that the law says you should not be granting credit without assessing whether or not someone can afford what they're asking for. So it is very important, and I know that this is something that it's a sticky point. It's a sticky point between credit controllers and salespeople and customers and us, and it is a sticky point. But this is what the law says. Okay.
And just on that point, that's where we as Trade Shield plays a significantly important role, because every limit recommendation we make, we have done that. So we've assessed the risk, we looked at them and seen that they're in business. We know how they pay, we know how they trade, we know how reckless they are or not reckless they are. And now we have tested the affordability, and now we make a recommendation. All right. So we're saying you can recommend you can trade better or more with this company or this person. And that's what this is all about. Okay.
Absolutely. So before you say yes to that account, you should be, should have the responsible basis for believing. And of course, that comes back to that word trust, that the customer can actually afford to pay you back. And you can't just open accounts on the hope and a handshake. Unfortunately, that's not the way we work today. Even though we do want to believe in our customers, we do want to, make sure that they are honest and that we can trust them. But we still need to make sure that we're protecting ourselves. There are a lot of risks involved here. So we want to make sure that we're, before we go in and say yes, that we're actually pulling the credit check, that you look at the financials, that you look at how they've paid other people, which is what Martin mentioned earlier, and then the law that is insisting on what is the best practice. So it's not us coming and saying it, it's actually the law. There's a guideline that says, how do we do this properly? Okay. So
there's a question in the question box
in the chat.
Saying, when Trade Shield makes a recommendation, does this mean that you will AFS? Now, I don't know what does that mean. I think the question is that does that mean you
It's
will
will
offer?
you
Will
have
we read the
AFS?
AFS?
Yeah.
AFS standing for annual financial
Well, no,
statements
I
or
know what that
audited
means, but
financial
I mean,
statements.
does
No, I
it
don't
mean
mean
you
you don't
assess
know. I
them?
meant for,
Uh,
um,
and
yeah.
to answer your question, Renee, we will assess them if we
Mhm.
have them. And
Yes,
sometimes our clients are their buyers don't want to necessarily divulge the information to them or to anybody else. We then view that information and we make a recommendation outside of the system, but that's not always
yeah,
recommendable. We would rather have the information come into us. And remember, we send it off to our partner, which is Moody's, and Moody's does the analysis, and Moody's comes back with that recommendation to us on various
as
different
well.
factors and topics. And we will
Hmm.
talk about that. That's a different training session in its own.
Mm,
But if there are financial statements, we don't just let them hang around. We use that information very effectively. Unless
yeah,
we have signed an NDA where we are not allowed to disclose, we will analyze them, but don't disclose. We'll make a recommendation.
absolutely, absolutely. And so, the most important thing, and we say this often, that if you grant credit without doing that, you are lending recklessly. Okay, so that is very important to say. Okay, maybe it was a small amount and you're happy to take on the risk, but if you are lending large sums of product and or services and you don't do the analysis, it is considered reckless lending. And the consequences are actually quite serious. Besides for your own business, so credit can be declared as reckless and the court can suspend the agreement or even set the debt aside entirely. So again, you can be left unable to collect. So that's important, that if you were wanting to take out a judgment and the court is going to ask for all of this information, when you onboarded a customer, did you check these certain things? And if you didn't, there is a possibility that you will have to land up writing this off as bad debt as a result of not following the processes correctly. So here's some practical advice. Assess before you grant and then document your decision. Write it down, do the checks, ask why, which is important. We always talk about that, process of the 5 whys, why, till we get to the final answer. And if it isn't written down, as far as anyone is concerned, it didn't happen. So keep it in your ERP, keep it in your accounting systems, wherever you want to keep it, upload it into TradeShield, into the document section. If you haven't yet signed up for that, you should do that now. And so, make sure that you have it in a place that you can find it. If you still like those filing cabinets, fine, just make sure that you have a record. But now in the 21st century, most of things should be stored online and in a cloud so that if there was a fire, they will still be in the cloud and safe forever. So I want to leave you with just this one thought over here, and that is, think about how this reframes the whole thing. This isn't just the law nagging at you, it's a proper affordability process in a single best tool. So you have been keeping your bad debt and your write-offs down. I'll come to you now, Neil, so that the NCA is actually pushing you to do the thing that protects your own business. And so do it right from the beginning and save yourself a world of pain at the end of that collections process. Go for it, Neil.
So Renee just asked, I don't know if this is coming up in the presentation, you must just let me know, but Renee's just asked if we could perhaps touch on how we process bank statements.
As in, how does TradeShield process bank statements?
Yeah.
Sure. It isn't coming up in this as we're just talking about the laws. But to cover that, Renee, what happens is we ask for 3 months bank statements with a minimum of more than 10 transactions per month. And those bank statements need to be in a system generated PDF. In other words, not a scanned document, because anyone, even me, can amend a PDF. It's really easy with the tools that we have today. So it has to be a system generated PDF. And the reason for that is actually there's lots of layers inside a PDF. And so you can tell if something is a system generated PDF if you're able to highlight specific words on a document. That means that it is not a set scan. And so we then run that through a system that we've created. It's called OCR technology. Neil, just look up for me what OCR means. It's like optical something or another. And basically it reads the document and it extracts the information. And we look at things like, where is the money coming from? When is that money coming in? So there's that head time. Oh, here we go. Thank you, Malatabo. It says it's optical character recognition. That's what OCR stands for. And thank you, Neil, for popping that into the chat. We love all these acronyms, not. So what we then do is we then extract the information and we look at over a 3-month period. So as I said, where is the money coming from? So is it coming from, loans that are being borrowed from other companies or from directors? Is it coming from trading of their business? When is it coming in? So there's that head time that we look at. And then from all of that, we calculate what is the annual revenue or annual turnover of this business from those 3-month statements using a calculation. And from that, we can then assess the affordability to say, how much can this customer afford? I hope that answers your question, Renee. Okay, perfect. So the last thing I want to say on the NCA that we want to talk about is, this being the referee. So there are 3 things that I want to take you, that you want you to take back to your desk. So number 1 is check whether or not you qualify as a credit provider. And majority of you on the call most probably do. The simplest test for most of us is, do you charge interest or a fee on overdue accounts? And if the answer is yes, you may well be a credit provider. Congratulations. So in the eyes of the law anyway. So you may need to confirm that properly, and don't guess, don't just assume that you're exempt because you don't just sell goods. Okay. Number 2 is, if you need to register, then you need to register. The threshold is 0, therefore, meaning, in other words, it doesn't matter what value you trade at, from anywhere from 0 rands all the way up, and you trade on credit, then there is no hiding behind the small anymore. And remember that the sting is in the tail. Agreements from the unregistered provider can be declared as void, and you will lose the ability to recover it. Number 3 is to assess affordability. Before you grant, write it up, write it down, make sure that you have all your checks, and record it is both in your defense if anyone ever questions you on your decision, that, the best protection against bad debt is is 2 for 1. That's really where it is. And that's the rule book. So now that we've done that and we know what the referee does and who enforces it, I'll come to you in a second, Ivana. We'll move on to the next one. Let me see. You're still able to unmute yourself. Go ahead.
Yes.
Jane?
Hi, Amy. I want to pick your brain, if you don't mind. Can you hear me? It's Jane.
Yes, I can. Hi, Jane.
Thanks. Anyway, I just want to get some clarity from you on the registration of, whether I'm an insistent provider and whether I should register or not. So my question to you is, the scenario is I only have customers with credit apps that have declared that they are over the million, the asset value and their turnover. Okay,
Yes.
so that's number 1. They declared that in my credit app, ticked it. Okay.
Yes.
Which makes me an incidental provider. Do I
Yes.
need to register still?
Yes, you do.
Why?
So anytime that you're going to be offering a credit service to a customer, you need to make sure that you register yourself as such so that they know that you're providing credit. Whether or not, and as I said before, if you are going to then provide credit to a customer, meaning that you allow them to buy from you on terms, you are an incidental credit provider and therefore you need to register. And if you're an intentional credit provider, you also need to register. So I think the confusion comes in is if you think that you are not a credit provider, but you actually are.
Originally, with the Credit Act, they differentiated between installment credit and 30-day and 60-day credit. So are you telling me that changed, and when did it change?
In 2016.
Okay.
No, November 2016. Yes.
I'm a little bit behind the way. Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's talk about the National Credit Regulator, or the NCR. And this is a name that we live, eat, and breathe at TradeShield, because we ensure that we comply with them. Even though we are not a credit bureau, we deal with a lot of credit bureau information. And of course, our parent entity, which is Inoxico, is a registered credit bureau, and we have to comply with the rules of the NCR. But it's not just us, it's you too. And so this is a quick but important section, but knowing who's watching and what they can do, this changes seriously how you take everything that we've just covered. And maybe some of the answers you're looking for, Renee, will be in this section here. So who exactly is the NCR, the National Credit Regulator? This was set up by the National Credit Act itself. And I can say that in South Africa, we're actually really lucky that we have all of these governing bodies, including the NCR as well as CIPC, because in a lot of other countries that we deal with, they don't have a regulator to make sure that everyone is conforming to the rules and regulations. And so it is actually something that works really, really well in our country. So the Act was created as its own referee. Its job is to regulate the entire credit industry within South Africa, not just the banks, but everyone who pays, who plays in that credit field. So let me walk you through what what they actually do, because it comes to the broader, than what people think it is. So first, and let me just tell you, to apply with the NCR is not an easy process. It can take at least a year if you're wanting to get a reseller license for bureau data. So that's just a random fact that we are going through this, and they make you jump through a lot of hoops to do so. First of all, they register the industry. So the credit providers, that might be you, it might be credit bureaus. There are the people who hold the credit data. So you pull, when you check on a customer, they're the ones who keep that data, that data, not data. So debt counselors, payment distribution agents, all of them register with the NCR, so that the NCR is the gatekeeper of the entire system. Secondly, they monitor and they research. So they watch how credit is being granted across the country, and they publish reports on the state market, okay, the state of the market of what's happening in the country. And if reckless lending keeps creeping up, they're going to see it. Obviously, if you're especially a large enough company, then it's definitely going to come onto their radar. So third, this is the one that you should get to your attention. They investigate and then they enforce. And if there is a complaint, somebody can complain about you to the NCR, then they can issue with a compliance notice telling you that you need to fix something, and they can refer matters to the National Consumer Tribunal if it gets further down the line, which is where real penalties get handed down. And we're talking about money penalties. And this is not just your registration desk. They have teeth. They're wanting to catch you. They're actually wanting to bite you. So underneath all of that, the entire reason for existing is that they keep the credit market fair, or at least they try to. They try to keep it responsible and trustworthy, which is when, if you think about it, in your own interest too, because the market is full of reckless lenders, and bad debt is bad for everybody. It's not just me, it's you as well. So we want to make sure that we're compliant, but we also want to make sure that we as a business, we are also somebody's debtor. We buy stock, supplies, whatever it is from somebody else. We all need to fall within this range, and like to make sure that everybody's following those rules as well, to make sure that we are all compliant. Okay, so the compliance and the cost of getting it wrong. So how do we say on the right side of the referee? And honestly, it's not that complicated. So if you're required to register, then you must register. And then keep that registration current, pay your annual fees, because letting it lapse is just bad, as it's just as bad as never registering, basically. So follow the NCA's rules and on how agreements, fees and interests work as well. So maybe have a look with your attorneys at your terms and conditions to make sure that you are compliant with what is said, because a lot of people then will say, oh, I'm not a registered credit provider, therefore I can't charge you interest. But the truth is that there are certain things that you can do, whether you are incidental or purposely providing credit. So make sure that you touch base with your attorneys on your terms and conditions. And so the NCA rules on how agreements, fees, and interest work. And when you check on a customer's credit, you use a credit bureau that's registered with the NCR, and almost all reputable ones are, or we should hope that they all are. What you will see is that you do get a lot of people that are not credit bureaus like ourselves, but purchase and leverage off data from credit bureaus. Okay. And so you want to make sure that you're working with somebody who is compliant with the NCR. So if you are a reseller or a repurchaser of credit bureau data, you would need to register with the NCR. So if you ever get a compliance notice, don't stick it in the drawer. Respond to it promptly. And a compliance notice means that you need to act quickly, as a small problem can become a really big one if it is ignored, as with anything. And now on the other side of that, what happens if you do get it wrong? The NCR can investigate you. They can issue with a compliance notice forcing you to change how you operate. And that's quite a big deal for you, because they're going to investigate you, which means that's you're going to have to provide all this information. So that documentation that we spoke about, why you made certain decisions, is going to be absolutely vital to protect yourself. So this is where you don't want to get a penalty, but this is where those penalties live. And in serious cases, they can actually cancel your registration entirely, meaning that your business will cease to exist. They will deregister you at CIPC. And so making sure that you're granting credit can put you out of business. And remember, on a recurring theme, agreements that fall foul on the rules can become unenforceable. So it gets you back into that nightmare of money that you simply cannot recover. And if you haven't done your expected credit losses correctly, that again can close your business down. So we want to make sure that we're protecting ourselves. So it's not meant to frighten you. It's just meant to make sure that you get the point that there are consequences for not following the rules. And the good news is that if you are doing it and you are doing the right things, then they mostly overlap with running a tidy professional credit operation, which is what we hope you do anyway. And or the people that you deal with do the same as well. And I suppose you could also then complain about them to the NCR if they're not. So the next thing that we want to talk about is the Consumer Protection Act, and this is the CPA. And if the NCA is about, how you grant credit, the CPA is, the heart of how you treat the customer and what you put in front of them to sign. This is the one that lives in the terms and conditions and in your surety documentation and in your credit application forms. So it's very close to home for a credit team. Where it does not live, and this is an excuse we hear all the time, when you phone someone and say, can you give me a trade reference? And they say, sorry, I can't because of Popia or Consumer Protection Act. They're just hiding behind the actual act. So understanding what the rules are will also help us understand what's allowed and what's not allowed. So the Consumer Protection Act, what is it trying to do? It's a one-liner. It's about being fair, honest, transparent, and dealing with your customers. So there's no tricks, there's no misleading marketing, there's no nasty surprises buried in a clause at number 47. It governs the goods and the services that you supply. Okay, so now, just like the NCA, the CPA has a line, and it's a different number. So don't mix them up. For the CPA, the magic number is 2 million Rand. So every individual person is protected, full stop. The small businesses are protected to a jurisdiction, and or an individual or a sole proprietor, whatever you want to call them, and or an SSME. They are protected below that 2 million. Okay, so that's the magic number here. So if you are below, you belong to the CPA. If you are above, you belong to the CPA, and if you're below, you are protected by the NCA. Okay. And so once a business's customer is bigger than that, they lose most of their CPA protection, but the law then assumes that a bigger company can look after themselves. So the NCA line is 1 million and the CPA line is 2 million. So different laws, different thresholds, and they are, they are subtly but genuinely just trips up people so that you can, not understand and not be clear about what it actually does. So when you sell goods on credit, you actually have got two things happening. There's the credit agreement that you have, that they're going to be paying you over time, and then the bit that sits under the NCA, not the CPA, and that's the goods or the services that you've supplied. And they're still covered by the CPA, so not one single deal can have an NCA governing body on the credit side of things, and the CPA governs the goods side of things. So making sure that we've got our credit worthiness, and then we've got our individuals as well. And so they're not on either or, as sometimes they play a part together. I hope that is clear, and that I'm getting the point across to you about the difference between the CPA and the NCA. I don't see any questions. Okay, so the rights that lands on your desk. So let's get a bit practical over here. So which CPA rights actually land on your desk as a credit person? And that could be, if you're a CFO, a financial manager, a credit controller, a credit manager, it doesn't matter. There are 4 things that I want you to really, bring to your attention. So the first one is plain and understandable language. And I say this at the office all the time. You don't know how clever or stupid the person is on the other side of the phone. Not that we call anyone stupid, but explain it to them as if they were. It cannot be in a way that somebody would not understand. And I know legal terminology can get that way, and some of it is even in Latin, it's not even in English, but your terms and conditions should very much be clear and understandable. So this is a really big one for credit teams. So your application form, your terms and conditions, your surety documentation, they all have to be written in a language that is that the ordinary person can understand. And if you're dealing with a company that is based in another country, then we need to ensure that they can speak English, and or if you are able to translate your terms and conditions for that country to make sure that they know exactly what they're getting into. This is a lot easier in today's world because you can just pop it into Google Lens. You can even hold up your phone and it will translate it for you. But we want to make sure that there is no ambiguity whatsoever. Okay, so we want to make sure that we don't make our terms and conditions too small, so they're not coming with a microscopic, oh my God, what is that terms and conditions? So make sure that they're very clear to read as well, because a customer can then stand up later and say, oh, I didn't understand that, or it was buried, or nobody explained this to me. And this is a genuine difference that is, a defense under the CPA. So you will have a problem if it is unclear and if all your documentation is hiding some tricky things that should not be there. And so one of the things that we recommend very explicitly is, if you are having somebody sign a surety document, make sure it is a separate document to your terms and conditions. Do not add it as a clause because it can set you up to failing in this realm. So the second one that we want to then talk about is to be fair. And that's a word I don't enjoy. That's not fair. But in this case, we do want to be fair. We want to be just. We want to be reasonable. We want to offer reasonable terms. We don't want to set somebody up for failure. To say, I'm going to give you 15-day terms when I know that your treasury process only allows for 30-day terms. So you're setting them up for failure, which is not fair. And as I said, don't like that word. Don't try to get my kids not to use it. But you can slip, one can be sneaky and one-sided. And so your clauses in your contract can only benefit you and can really hurt the person that you're giving credit to. So we don't want to be that guy. And then, of course, the third is the cooling off period. So now that one's specific, if a transaction came in and it was, about as thorough direct marketing, and you call them up and you sent them a marketing SMS or an email, and you brought in as a result a consumer that have 5 business days to cancel within reason and without penalty, it's not for every sale to just direct marketing in that direction. So we also have to be careful about what we say and what we send them with regards to marketing as well. So you need to make sure that you're compliant on that period. And of course, as I said, when you're being given somebody's details, don't list them on marketing websites so they get spammed. That's not allowed anymore. Okay, and then the fourth one is, of course, the quality and the fair value. So the goods that you supply have to be of a good quality and have to be safe, and there have to be implied warranties on the consumer that the consumer can rely on. So we're making sure that it's not just a matter of credit, but we're actually, when the customer disputes an invoice and says that the goods were not, that they were faulty, then the CPA is the backdrop for that agreement. And for that argument. So we want to make sure that from the collections, that if there's going to be a delayed payment, that we are getting our delivery notes, we're making sure that they sign for those agreements in a good working order. And I see that time is running away without me. I'm just jabbering on here. So I want to jump straight into Poppy, and let's have a look at what the Poppy Act says. So in plain terms, this governs how organizations collects, uses, stores, and shares personal information. Okay, and the one thing that is unusual about Poppy compared to, data laws elsewhere is that it protects not just the individual's information, but with some respects, the information of the companies too. And so you will know that a lot of information is what we refer to as public information. So like ID numbers and directors' names, that's public information. It's not private information, because you're not looking at the person in their personal capacity, but you're looking at a business, and that falls outside of the Poppy Act. But at the heart of the Poppy Act are the 8 conditions that you have to meet and process of, when you are doing with personal information. So don't panic. They're mostly common sense, or at least I think they're common sense. And I'll give you the credit office version of this. So first is accountability. At the end of the day, that you're responsible. You can't outsource the blame. So processing that limitations on collections, making sure we're doing it lawfully, collecting minimal, whatever you need, and you're only using what you need. So you're not asking for their house address unless they're signing surety and you need to know where that is. So only get the information that you need. In order to onboard a person, you may need somebody's ID to run a credit check on them. That's a need. That's a specific purpose. So it's all about the purpose. Why are we asking for this information? Because we need it. And we need it not just because we want it, but we actually need it in order to run specific checks, for surety documentation, for verification, for putting information onto an invoice, for sending you that invoice. That is why we have your email address. We have your telephone number. It's for the purpose of the agreement, and not because we just want to phone you and sell you the next product. So we want to make sure that we keep the information that we're giving them and the quality that we're giving it to them to be accurate and current, to make sure that we address any, if we do get flagged for Poppy, that we're making sure that we have the backup to say, I asked for this information because this is how I'm going to use it. And I'm putting it into my ERP system so that I can invoice this person. And I asked for an ID copy to verify the details of the director, because I need to know who I'm dealing with so that I don't recklessly lend. And so this is where that Poppy Act comes into play, that these conditions need to be met. And so that's really Poppy in a nutshell. It's making sure that we're asking for this information, and we need to understand, how do we store it? How long can we store it? And why are we storing it at all? And if you can validate and verify why you are doing those things, then you absolutely can keep somebody's information, but they need to give you permission as well. So there is that Poppy consent clause that we do recommend, that if you don't have it in your T's and C's, that you make sure you have it somewhere on your documentation, in your contracts. Make sure that you are getting consent to make sure that they know that you will be not using it, for the wrong purposes. Okay, so we want to make sure you've got accountability, purpose of specification, information quality is good, security safeguards. You may want to tell them, and this is your privacy policy, that you should be posting publicly on your websites and or part of your credit applications to say, how are we going to protect you, Mr. Customer? Processing limitations that we want to make sure that we have, and then obviously further processing. So don't reuse data for unrelated purposes. So don't take somebody's financials from this company and use it there, or as I said, incorrect marketing. There's openness, so be transparent about what you are going to hold and why. And then, of course, the data subject participants. So let people see and correct their data as well. So you can then send follow-up emails to say, this is what I've got for you, Mr. Customer. You can have them do reviews every couple of months to make sure that the data is still correct. Yes, Renee. Renee, can you unmute yourself? There you go.
Hi, yes, Amy. Sorry, I know that you're racing off to do quite a few slides left,
Yes.
but I don't know if other people, but I've got to hop off, and I'd hate to
Yes.
miss the whole process. Is there a continuation that we can do?
Yes, we can definitely do that. I will complete finishing off the full process, even those who need to drop off, and then I will put the recording in our knowledge center, which I will pop for you over here. I will also put the link in my next email for next Thursday so that you can go and grab those the slides as well as the recording. So no problem.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I have to pop off.
No problem. It was a big topic.
Yeah, perhaps too much to chew in an hour.
I know it's a lot.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you.
And no problem. Thanks for your attendance. So for those who do need to drop up, you're welcome to do so now. For those that can stay, I'm going to continue. It should be at just another few minutes around what Popia is. So Popia in the credit office. So what does this actually mean for your day-to-day? So let me give you these different options that we have. So first is the lawful basis of everything that you hold. And most of what credit teams collects, your basis is either a credit agreement itself, where you need the information to do the deal, or a clear consent from the customer. So this point is you can just either collect the data because you feel like it, or there is a reason that the law recognizes for why you're going to collect this information. Secondly, you have the collection only of what you need. And so this is the one that credit officers fall down on because, on instinct, they grab everything just in case. So try to resist doing that. First of all, it makes your credit application process long, and you're asking for things that are actually not relevant. And we see this coming between the friction, again, between sales and credit, because sales are like, why are you asking for this information when it isn't necessary? So try your best to resist asking for things that you don't need. Like, for example, as I said, the director's home address. And so if you don't need it, don't ask for it. Thirdly is to secure it. So making sure that you have, a retention period, a lock on the data to make sure that you have proper security on your systems. And so making sure that you have that personal information, your Popia Act, visible for them to say, how long am I going to store your information? How long am I going to be dealing with it? And so that's the third option. And then the fourth one is credit bureaus. So this is where the NCA and Popia hold hands, where you can pull a customer's credit report, but when the report, payment behavior comes back from the bureau, you're processing personal information. So you need to have proper consent and on a proper basis to do this. So we get this question a lot to say, can't I just vet this customer before I've onboarded them? And the answer is no. And that is because there is personal information that we need in order to give you that credit report. And the issue with that is if we don't have consent, then you could be liable for an issue. So where this comes into play is if you have a customer that you used a paper-based application and you used the TradeShield platform and you used the skip application process, but you didn't attach that credit application, you could be putting yourself in a predicament. So even if you use the skip application, please ensure that you attach at least signed terms and conditions to say, I do have consent for this information. And so that is vitally important. That if your team does make use of that skip application, that they are making sure to attach the signed paper-based application. Don't request information without proper consent. You can get into trouble. So what happens if you get Popia wrong? Okay, so the enforcement body is called the information regulator. And for a few years, honestly, it felt like a bit, like they were really on a rampage to try and get you. And the law was that nobody was really being chased at some point. It came into play and nobody knew when it was actually effective and when it started and when it didn't. But now things have changed and the regulator has started using its powers. It's used it in the first big administration fine. So a 5 million rand against a government department was actually surfaced recently for a data breach that then failed to comply with the enforcement notices. It issued notices to major global platforms, and the era of Popia is now, a huge portion of where we're at. And again, they do list you on public websites. And so if they are going to investigate you, you will be able to Google that and it will sit against your name. So what can you actually do? Well, what can they do to you? It can investigate complaints. It can issue enforcement notices telling you to fix something first, and it can impose an administrative fine of up to 10 million rand. And that's obviously the most serious of offenses. They're not going to be like, oh, you took this person's ID number and you put it on your system, but you didn't get consent. They're not going to fine you 10 million rand. But there is, if there is even a possibility of imprisonment. So if you really do handle this data badly, your directors or yourself can land up to 10 years in prison. And on top of all of that, the individuals whose data was mishandled can sue you in your, in their personal capacity over and above what the regulator can do to you as well. So it can be quite a serious matter. So any mishandled information can put you liable for those damages, those fines, criminal exposure, and these are civil claims that can happen all at once. So you don't want that to happen to you. So here's a practical tip that I want most of you to hold on to. If the breach does happen, say your systems have gotten hacked or your laptop was full of customer data and that person walks out the door with it, you have an obligation to notify the information regulator. So that is the first thing. If a breach takes place, then make sure that you tell the information regulator straight away, as well as the affected people, so that that they can be aware that their data has been compromised and that can put them at risk. If you do not, that is hiding a breach, and it turns out that it is, if it's a huge problem, it can be catastrophic to your business. And the government department that got fined for failing to comply, it's not just the breach itself. So they just didn't notify the regulator of that breach, and that they landed up with a 10 million rand fine. In fact, I think they actually fined one of the large compliance officers as well was fined for breach of Popia, which was quite fascinating. So let's jump into this next fun topic that's been raised over the last couple of years, and that is Fica. So we had a question to an attorney that was doing a chat for us quite a few months ago to say, if the customer does not want to provide me with the information to ensure that I am compliant with Fica, how do I go about it? And the truth is that the recommendation says that Fica trumps everything that we have spoken about. And if you are not Fica compliant, then we do not recommend that you do business with that customer. So if they refuse to provide you with the documentation, then you should not do business with them, because the Fica, which is the Financial Intelligence Center Act, it says that everything else, it doesn't matter. This is the most important. So make sure that whatever your customer says, that if they cannot provide you with your Fica requirements, then you cannot trade with them. So what is Fica? In plain terms, the South African's main anti-money laundering law. That's really what it is. And it is run by a body called the Financial Intelligence Center, or FIC, F-I-C. The whole point of this is to stop dirty money washing through the system. And we don't mean putting it in the washing machine, but through, hiding money through businesses and or what seems like legitimate transactions. So the way it does that is by forcing certain businesses to really know who they're dealing with, not just the company's name on the application form, but the actual people behind it. And we're talking about the directors, the businesses, the holding companies, the trust who owns the trust, who owns the trust, who owns the trust, who owns the trust, and trustees, and. So here is the changes that turns from someone else's problem into possibly your problem. So for the last few years, Fica mostly applied to banks, attorneys, and estate agents. but what the law calls accountable institutions. You know, that's what it was originally. But from in late 2022, the list was then widened. And it now includes certain credit providers and businesses dealing with high value goods, where a deal is 100,000 Rand or more. You have to then be registered as a credit provider under the NCA. And remember, we talked about this right at the beginning, and therefore you may need to be Fica compliant, and maybe even apply directly with with the real obligation. So that's a really big shift that we didn't have before. And as of 2022, like middle of COVID, they decided to expand that to us as well. So why is this everyone suddenly talking about it, and why is this so serious? Because in South Africa, we've got something called a grey list, something called grey listed. We as a country were grey listed by the Global Financial Watchdog, which is the FATF. Back in 2023. So being grey listed is a bit like your business being flagged as a high risk by the bank. And everyone starts watching you a little bit more closely, and it costs you. So the country worked really hard to fix the gaps and finally came off that list in October of 2025. So that was really just a couple of months ago that we were removed from that grey list. But the regulators are not just relaxing. The FIC is actively inspecting and fining businesses that do not comply, so that we do not go back as a country onto that grey list. So my honest practical advice on this is don't just guess. Check whether or not your business is accountable as an institution under FIC. We can make recommendations of companies that we work with under the FIC side. So we are not FIC experts. We deal with a company called Encino. And there are multiple other businesses. We don't have an affiliation. It's just a company that we work with, where you can have your credit application integrated into the FIC process, and so that they can go and do your checks for you and make sure that you are compliant. So we want to make sure that if you don't know, make sure that you investigate that. Okay, so if FIC does apply to you, what does this actually look like on your day-to-day? So the good news is it lives in a place you already know well, I hope, and that is opening of the accounts processes. So this is essential. That most important points that you walk away with is first and biggest is what is called KYC. And I know, Martin, this is one of your favorite things, which is know your customer. So before you trade, you identify and verify who the client actually is, and not after the first invoice. We'll get the customer's documents later, but we need to do it now. And this is the FIC documentation. And you need to make sure that you pile this up and you ask for all of this at the onboarding of this customer. So things like registration, the ID copy, proof of address, and you're confirming exactly who they are. So some of these documents you probably already are collecting, but they can be a little bit more intensive. For example, it may require a green barcoded ID and or I'm moving away from green barcoded IDs to like the ID card. So the second thing here is that you want to be part of, make sure that you have beneficial ownership, making sure that you're dealing with the person who's the beneficial owner. And as I said before, we have seen companies that are owned by a trust, and that trust is owned by another trust, and that trust is owned by another trust, and that trust is owned by another trust. And eventually we need to figure out who is the beneficial owner of it. It's not enough to know the company name. You need to know the real human beings who ultimately owns and controls that company. So money launderers love to hide behind layers of companies. So the law says follow it through the actual person. There is even a registrar, a CIPC for this. So make sure that you follow that rule. The third thing here is screen and keep your records. So check your customer against the sanctions list, keep an eye out for anything that looks high risk, and hold your records properly and securely, which, by the way, ties directly into the Popia Act, as we said earlier, making sure that you have your personal protection information and how you're going to secure that. and make that public, of course. And fourth, of course, is report anything that is unusual. So if you see a suspicious transaction or a large cash payment or anything that looks suspicious to you, report it. You don't have to be the investigator, but you do have to escalate. When in doubt, escalate. And this can then be handled by the compliance team within your business and making sure that you then flag it. So here's the thing I really want you to see, that this onboarding moment is where everything you've covered today comes together. So FIC then says, know who you are. The NCA says, check, you can afford it, and the registrar, if you must. And then Poppy says, handle all this information lawfully and safely. It's the one front door, and it's the front door of everything that we've spoken about to all three of these laws, and then making sure that you stand by all these things. So your onboarding needs to be right, and you are if you are satisfied, a huge chunk of all of them is then making sure that you've covered all these things at the onboarding. So you have not yet even traded with this customer, and then comes the rules and regulations once they've already been on board. So do it right from the get-go. So the whole session pulls together into this one slide. You can see in the paragraph over here, and you can print it if you want and stick it on your wall. It's these 5 boxes that we spoke about earlier. So just a recovery is the NCA confirms whether or not you are a credit provider. And if you are, you need to be registered. Remember that the threshold is 0. Then assess affordability before you grant credit and write your decision down. The CPA, your terms and conditions, and your surety documentation must be in plain language and must be fair. Poppy says that we have there's a lawful basis for proper consent for the data that we're going to be holding, and how we're going to collect it and how we're going to store it, and making sure that we're going to keep it safe and use it for the reasons that we've said so. The NCR says keep the regulations current and your fees paid. Use credit bureaus that are registered with the NCR. And making sure that we are compliant. And then, of course, FIC, so know your customer before you trade with them. Verify beneficial ownership before the company, behind the company, and then, of course, screen good records and make sure that you are working with a FIC registered entity to help you do this for you. Nobody's expecting you to be, the person who knows everything. So now we're not going to turn this into a sales pitch, but this is the in this training session, this is not an advert. And of course, we're just here to give you our advice on who we know in the industry. But, I just want to make sure that if you haven't got certain people or things in place, you're welcome to reach out to us for us to make recommendations. If you'd like to change your terms and conditions and you'd like to speak to an attorney that we have worked with before, we're happy to make that recommendation. If you'd like to speak to somebody at Encino for your FIC requirements, we're happy to make that recommendation. Just saying that we are not the experts in this field, and we would like to put you in touch with those that are. And making sure that we help you stay compliant, and we don't want to see you on that sanctions list or any other list of any kind, and that's really what we're here to do. And then the role of Trade Shield is to make sure that we are not lending recklessly, that we are monitoring all of our credit limits all of the time. We're keeping up with our bureau data, and we're making sure that we follow those rules. And that's where we do kind of come into play. We can also help you with the onboarding side of things to make sure that your onboarding is compliant. And if you need to collect your FIC documents, that can be done through the Trade Shield onboarding process as well. So if you want to speak to your account manager, you can reach out to them or reach out to support, of course, and we are happy to help you and take you through what that looks like. So if there's nothing else to remember, these are the references that I have made with regards to who they are, what role that they play in this industry. And of course, we always thank you for your time, and apologies for going over time. And I appreciate that you stayed with me. And as I said, we will put this recording onto our Knowledge Center so that you can view it later, as well as the slides, so you can keep that for yourself if you'd like to print it. And of course, we're always here to support you and to make sure that we're following the rules and helping you do so. I hope you have a wonderful Thursday and an excellent week, and welcome to the middle of the year. I forgot to say it's June. My goodness gracious. And for those that are Trade Shield users, we'll see you on Tuesday with our session with Neil. And for those who aren't, we'll see you next week, Thursday. Thank you. Yes, I see there is a question. Of course, you can stay on the line if you'd like to hear that. I've unmuted you. So you can go ahead and ask that question. I don't know if it was a question or if you were just raising your hand, but if you've got a question, by all means, you can raise it, and we're staying on the line to do so. Oh, I forgot to put my poll up. Look at me, forgetting all these things. So if you are still on the line and you'd like to rate this session, we would love you to do so. Or you can just pop it into the chat if I'm a little slow here. And of course, your feedback means a lot to us. Ah, Neil, I see what you were saying. The polls does not like us.
But I think you got 71 hand taps, and I think that's already a good one.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Join us every Thursday from 10 to 11.